I had heard about the app. Randonautica, they called it. People swore it could lead you to strange places, coincidences you couldn't explain. So, one night, after a couple of beers and more than a little boredom, I decided to try it. I sat in my car on the edge of town, my phone screen glowing, as the app asked me to set my intention. Adventure, I typed, though the word felt hollow in the pit of my stomach. I hesitated for a moment before tapping the generate button. Coordinates appeared on the screen, somewhere deep in the countryside. The drive out there felt endless, the sun sinking below the horizon as I navigated narrow roads, surrounded by towering trees and open fields. There were no streetlights, only the fading light of dusk. When I finally arrived, my headlights illuminated a long gravel road stretching into the distance. At the end of it stood a house, no more like the skeleton of one. The place was ancient, a relic from some forgotten era. Its roof sagged, the paint peeling in long strips from its weather-beaten walls. The windows, most of them boarded up, looked more like hollow eyes watching my every move. The longer I stared at it, the more uneasy I felt. Every instinct told me to turn around, but I couldn't. The app led me here for a reason, right? What harm could a quick look do? I killed the engine and stepped out, the chill of the evening air biting at my skin. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last, as if the very ground beneath me resisted my approach. Gravel crunched loudly underfoot, the only sound in the oppressive silence. When I finally stood before the front porch, I noticed the weeds choking the old farming equipment littered around the yard, rusted relics left to rot. They seemed to shift in the wind, whispering something ancient and unknowable. The porch creaked under my weight as I climbed the steps, the smell of mold and rot hanging thick in the air. I glanced through a crack in one of the boarded-up windows, and my heart skipped a beat. Inside, the house was dark, but I could make out shapes, furniture draped in white sheets, frozen like ghosts, waiting for the right moment to wake. Dust floated in the thin beams of light, twisting and turning like they were alive. And then I heard it, a floorboard creaking, deep inside the house. I jerked back, heart racing, my breath shallow. For a second I told myself it was the wind, or maybe an animal. But then it came again. Closer. Against my better judgment, I reached for the door. The knob was cold and rough in my hand, and when I turned it, the door groaned as if protesting my intrusion. Inside, the smell was worse, a mix of rot and something else. Something metallic. I couldn't place it, but it turned my stomach. The interior was a time capsule, untouched for decades, with old furniture and decorations that hadn't seen life in years. The only sound was the pounding of my heart in my ears. As I took a step inside, a low growl rumbled from the shadows, deep and guttural. My body froze, every hair on my neck standing on end. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something watching me, something waiting. I took another step, the floor beneath me groaning in protest, and then I heard it again, the sound of movement, something shifting just out of sight. Panic gripped me. My brain screamed at me to leave, but my legs felt like lead, frozen to the spot. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house, the sound of something heavy slamming against a wall. I stumbled back, my hand fumbling for the door behind me. As I turned to run, a cold gust of wind blew through the house, slamming the door shut with a deafening bang. I was trapped. The temperature dropped, the air growing thick and stifling. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scanned the room, looking for anything, any sign of what was there with me. Then in the corner of my eye I saw it, a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, its form shrouded in shadow, barely visible in the dim light. but its eyes glowed a sickly, burning yellow. I backed away, my feet moving on their own, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, suffocating me. I reached the door, my hand scrambling for the knob, but before I could open it, the figure stepped forward, a slow, deliberate movement that sent ice through my veins. I yanked the door open and bolted, the figure's presence pressing against my back as I sprinted to my car. I didn't stop, didn't look back until I was safely inside, with the doors locked. As I fumbled for the keys, I glanced up at the house one last time. In the upstairs window, I saw it. That same figure, watching me, its eyes burning into mine with a malice I couldn't comprehend. I slammed the car into gear and peeled out of there, gravel spraying as I sped away. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel its eyes on me. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, glowing in the dark. I haven't touched the app since, but I don't think it matters. Some things, once found, don't let go. We had no idea what we were getting into when Emily suggested we try the Randonautica app. It was supposed to be a bit of fun, something to kill the boredom of our last weekend together before we all headed back to reality. Emily, Ben, Ashley, and I had been friends since college, and the idea of one last adventure in the Appalachian Mountains seemed perfect. The app gave us random coordinates deep in the woods, miles from the nearest trail. At first it was just a game, hiking through the dense forest, laughing and joking about what we might find. But the deeper we went, the more the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavy, cooler, like the woods themselves were watching us. The canopy above thickened, turning the afternoon into a strange, dim twilight. Even the birds had gone silent. Ashley was the first to feel it. She slowed down, rubbing her arms like the chill had cut through her jacket. "This place feels off," she said, glancing around as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. Ben rolled his eyes, ever the skeptic. "It's just the trees. You know how isolated places can mess with your head." But I couldn't shake the feeling either. Something wasn't right. The usual sounds of the forest were gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness. It felt like we were intruding on something ancient, something that didn't want us there. We followed the app's coordinates until we came upon a small clearing. It was unnatural. The trees surrounding it, twisted and gnarled, like they were leaning in to listen. And there, in the center, was an old stone well, crumbling and covered in moss, as if it had been abandoned for centuries. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment, none of us spoke. Ashley broke the silence. "Okay, this is seriously creepy. Let's just go back." But Emily, ever curious, stepped forward. "Wait, look at this." She pointed beyond the well. At first I couldn't see what she was talking about, but then my eyes adjusted to the shadows. There, half hidden among the trees, stood a figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its body shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out any features, just a silhouette, but its presence was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. I felt its gaze on us, heavy, like it was waiting, watching. "Do you see that?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Ben, who had been so confident before, was now deadly quiet. His eyes were fixed on the figure, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. "We need to leave, now." We didn't wait for another sign. We turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, our breaths ragged and desperate. I could hear the others behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to know if it was following us. By the time we reached the familiar trail, we were all panting, drenched in sweat, our hearts pounding in our chests. We stopped, bent over, trying to catch our breath. When we finally turned around, there was nothing. The woods were silent again, the clearing lost somewhere in the dense forest. Ben tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. Probably just some weirdo messing with us. None of us responded. We all knew there was something more to it, something beyond explanation. That night, back at the cabin, we barely spoke. Ashley couldn't stop pacing, while Emily sat by the window, staring out into the darkness as if expecting the figure to appear at any moment. I kept telling myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a shadow cast by the trees, but deep down, I knew better. As the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind outside, set my nerves on edge. Sleep was out of the question. Sometime after midnight, I heard a soft tapping on the window. My blood ran cold. Slowly I turned towards it, my heart hammering in my chest. Standing just outside, barely visible in the pale moonlight, was the figure. It was closer now, its outline more defined. I still couldn't see its face, but I knew it was staring directly at me. My breath caught in my throat, paralyzing me with fear. I scrambled out of bed, waking the others with my frantic movements. "It's here!" I shouted. "Outside!" We rushed to the window, but when we looked, there was nothing. The figure had vanished into the night, leaving behind only the oppressive silence. None of us slept after that. We packed our things and left the cabin before dawn, refusing to spend another moment in those woods. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the trees, half expecting to see that dark silhouette watching us, waiting for us to return. We never spoke about what happened again. It became an unspoken rule, a memory too terrifying to revisit. But I still think about it sometimes, especially at night when the shadows grow long and the world outside feels too quiet. I wonder if it's still out there, in those woods, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. And I wonder if they'll be as lucky as we were to get away. It was supposed to be just another night, nothing more than a chance to pass the time with something bizarre. My friend Josh wouldn't shut up about Randonautica, this app that supposedly leads you to random locations based on your intention. He swore it had a knack for unearthing the weird and unsettling, even though I had my doubts. But curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was downloading the app, setting my intention, find something eerie. The app buzzed to life, spitting out coordinates not far from my place, in a small park tucked into a quiet neighborhood. I figured, why not? It was late, close to 10 p.m., and the streets were quiet. I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The park wasn't much to look at, just a patch of grass, a few benches, and a rusted swing set. No kids, no families, just me and the night. I checked the app. I was right on top of the spot it had marked, but nothing seemed out of place. I almost laughed it off, ready to call it a waste of time, when I spotted something on the ground, just barely peeking out from beneath a bench. A doll. At first I thought it was trash, a toy some kid had dropped and forgotten. But as I crouched down to get a closer look, I realized it wasn't the kind of doll you'd expect to find in a park. Its porcelain face was cracked, the painted-on lips twisted into a fading smile. Its dress, once probably vibrant, was now faded and torn, caked in dirt. What sent a chill down my spine, though, were the eyes, glass eyes that seemed too real. They stared up at me, almost like they were waiting for me to pick it up. I hesitated. Something about the doll felt off. But my curiosity won out, and I lifted it into my hands. The porcelain was cold, colder than it should have been given the warm night air. It was heavy, too, unnaturally so. I quickly stuffed it into my backpack, not wanting to walk around with it in plain sight. I figured I'd show it to Josh later, laugh about how weird the app's results were. As I made my way home, that strange, prickling sensation started creeping up my neck. It was subtle at first, just a vague feeling that something wasn't right. But the closer I got to my apartment, the stronger it became, like someone was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, expecting to see someone trailing me. But the streets were empty. I reached my building, hurried up the stairs, and slammed the door shut behind me, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My apartment was dark, the only light filtering in from the street lamps outside. I tossed my backpack onto the couch, the doll landing with a soft thud, and headed to the kitchen for a beer, eager to shake off the nerves. That's when I heard it. A faint tap behind me. My spine went rigid. I turned slowly, eyes scanning the room. Nothing. Just the doll sitting on the couch right where I left it. I shook my head, laughing at myself for getting spooked over nothing. But as I went to close the fridge, I saw it again, out of the corner of my eye. The doll's head had turned. It was subtle, just a slight shift, but enough to make my heart lurch in my chest. It was staring right at me. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. Slowly, I stepped closer, kneeling in front of the couch. I could have sworn its head had been facing the window when I tossed it. Now, those cold, glass eyes were fixed on me, and that smile. It looked different somehow, sharper. I backed away, grabbing my phone from the counter. I needed to check the time, to call someone, to do anything but stand there frozen like an idiot. But the moment I unlocked the screen, the lights flickered. My heart pounded in my ears as I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. The doll wasn't on the couch anymore. I heard a sound, barely a whisper of movement, and whipped around. There it was, lying on the floor near the door, its face twisted toward me, that eerie smile mocking me. I backed up until I hit the kitchen counter, my mind racing. I had to be losing it. Dolls don't move. This couldn't be real. I grabbed the doll, intending to throw it out, burn it, do something, anything to get rid of it. But the moment my fingers wrapped around its cold body, a searing pain shot up my arm. I dropped it, clutching my wrist. There, in the dim light, I saw a small scratch. Just a thin line of blood, but enough to send my mind spiraling. I stumbled back into the living room, my eyes locked on the doll. It hadn't moved, but it didn't have to. I could feel it now, like a presence in the room, watching, waiting. The temperature in the apartment plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me as I backed toward the door, my hand fumbling for the knob. I didn't care where I went, as long as I got out. But before I could turn the knob, I heard a creak behind me. Slowly, I turned. The doll's head was twisted fully backward, its body lying limp on the floor. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, I heard it. "Don't leave." My legs buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, scrambling for the door. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of my own ragged breathing, and the cold, dead eyes of that doll burning into my skull. I don't know what it was or what it wanted, but I haven't been able to sleep since. That doll. It's still out there,